Close your eyes if you haven't already. Take a slow breath in and let it go. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nowhere you need to be. No problem waiting to be solved. Just this moment and this voice and the quiet that is beginning to settle around you like a soft, familiar blanket. Tonight, we are going to take a very gentle journey together. Not a journey across any great distance. Not a journey that requires any effort at all, really. It is a journey inward. A slow, drifting descent into one of the most fascinating and mysterious places that has ever existed. A place you carry with you everywhere you go, yet rarely stop to visit. We are going to spend some time exploring the architecture of the unconscious mind. And the first thing worth knowing as we begin is just how vast that place truly is. Right now, as you lie here, your conscious mind is doing something rather remarkable. It is reading the world. It is taking in the sound of this voice, perhaps noticing the weight of your body against the surface beneath you, perhaps registering a distant sound or the temperature of the air, or the way your breath moves in and out without any instruction from you at all. This is your conscious mind at work. Aware, present, attentive. And yet, here is something that may surprise you. Your conscious mind is only handling somewhere between 5 and 10% of everything your mind is actually doing right now. 5 to 10%. Which means that somewhere between 90 and 95% of your mental activity, the vast majority of everything happening inside you at this very moment, is happening below the surface. Out of sight, out of reach, in the quiet, wordless regions of the unconscious. Think about that for a moment. If your mind were an ocean, the conscious part, the part you think of as you, the part that makes lists and has conversations and worries about tomorrow, that part would be the thin, shimmering film at the very top. The surface, the place where the light reaches. And everything beneath it, all that cool, dark, moving depth, that is the unconscious. 90 to 95% of who you are, working away in silence, in ways you may never fully see or understand. It is humbling in a beautiful way. To realize that the version of yourself you walk around with every day, the one that chooses what to eat and what to say and how to feel, is really only a small portion of the whole. A spokesperson of sorts for a vast and largely invisible inner world. Let your body grow a little heavier now. Let the muscles in your face soften. Your jaw, your shoulders, the space between your eyebrows. There is nothing to figure out tonight. We are only here to wonder. Now, one of the things that makes the unconscious so interesting is not just its size, but its speed. Your emotions, the feelings that move through you, that color your experience of every single moment, those process faster than thought. Significantly faster. Before your conscious mind has even had a chance to form a sentence about what is happening, your emotional mind has already responded, already made a judgment, already shifted the chemistry of your body, tightened something in your chest, or released something in your shoulders, or sent a quiet ripple of unease or warmth through the whole of you. Emotion is older than language, older than logic. It evolved long before the parts of the brain that reason and reflect, and it moves with a speed that reason simply cannot match. This is why you can walk into a room full of strangers and feel something, a sense of ease or a vague discomfort or a kind of inexplicable warmth, before a single word has been spoken, before you have gathered any real information at all. Your emotional brain has already been busy, already scanning, comparing, responding, all before the conscious you has even said hello. And then there is intuition, that quiet knowing that arrives without explanation, the sense that something is right or wrong or important, without any clear reason you could point to. The feeling that you have been here before, or that this person can be trusted, or that you should take a different road home today. For a long time, intuition was treated with suspicion, as though it were irrational or wishful, or somehow less reliable than careful, deliberate thought. But what we now understand is that intuition is not the absence of reasoning. It is the product of an enormous amount of reasoning, reasoning that has already happened silently beneath the surface faster than consciousness can follow. Intuition arises from pattern recognition. Your unconscious mind has been quietly cataloging your experiences for your entire life. Every conversation, every face, every outcome, every sensation, building and refining an intricate, invisible library of patterns that it can access in an instant. When something feels familiar or dangerous or promising, even when you cannot say why, it is often because your unconscious has matched this moment to something in that library. It has done the work, and it is passing you the answer wordlessly as a feeling. That quiet hunch you sometimes get, it has been earned. It is the sum of everything you have ever learned, arriving in the only way it knows how. Let your breathing slow a little more now. Each breath in easy and natural. Each breath out carrying just a little more of the day with it. You are doing beautifully. Just let yourself sink. Now, many of the decisions you make, including decisions that feel deliberate, feel chosen, may have already been made by your unconscious mind before your awareness has even arrived at the question. Researchers studying the brain have found evidence that the neural activity associated with a decision can begin several seconds before a person reports being consciously aware of making it. The body knows. The deeper mind has already moved. And then, a moment later, consciousness arrives and experiences the decision as its own. This is not a frightening idea. There is no need to feel unsettled by it. It is simply a reminder that you are larger than you think you are. That the boundaries between the conscious and unconscious parts of yourself are softer than they appear. That there is a whole, wise, working intelligence inside you that does not need your supervision to do its job. In many ways, this is a relief. You do not have to figure everything out. You do not have to be awake for all of it. Much of the important work of being human happens quietly, in the background, while you rest. The unconscious is also the birthplace of something that shapes our experience in ways most of us never fully examine, what researchers call implicit bias. These are not the beliefs we hold consciously, not the opinions we would voice if asked. Implicit biases are the quiet, automatic associations that form over a lifetime of exposure, to stories, to images, to the patterns of the world around us. They operate beneath awareness, shaping perception in small and constant ways, before deliberate thought has a chance to intervene. This is not a comfortable topic, perhaps, but there is something almost tender in understanding it, because these patterns were not chosen. They were absorbed, accumulated. They are, in their own way, a record of every environment we have ever moved through, every message we ever received, whether we invited them in or not. To know this is not to excuse it, but it is to meet it with a little more compassion, the same compassion we might offer any process that runs in the dark without our full knowledge or consent. And speaking of processes that run without our full attention, habits. So much of what we do each day unfolds automatically. The way we make coffee in the morning, the route we drive, the particular sequence of small actions that carries us from waking to breakfast to the beginning of whatever the day holds. We are not really thinking through these things. We are running programs, deeply worn grooves in the mind, so smooth and familiar that they require almost no conscious involvement at all. This is one of the great efficiencies of the unconscious. It takes the patterns we repeat and automates them, freeing up the conscious mind for whatever is new or urgent or genuinely unknown. The unconscious is an extraordinary learner and an extraordinary saver. It watches. It encodes. And then, once a pattern is established, it runs it quietly, reliably in the background, so that you can be here, present, attending to other things. Now your eyes may be feeling very heavy. Your thoughts, perhaps, moving a little more slowly, a little more gently, like clouds in a still sky, drifting without hurry. This is exactly where you want to be. There is one quality of the unconscious that is perhaps the most dreamlike of all, and it is this: the unconscious has no sense of time, not the way the conscious mind does. Your conscious mind lives on a timeline. It remembers the past, anticipates the future, measures the distance between yesterday and tomorrow. It organizes experience into sequence, into before and after, into cause and effect. The unconscious does not do this. To the unconscious, a memory from childhood and a feeling from this morning exist in the same place at the same depth, with no clear boundary between them. The wound from long ago and the hope for tomorrow are neighbors. There is no then. There is no later. There is only a kind of timeless, layered now. This is why certain memories can feel so immediate. Why an old grief can surface in a moment as though it happened yesterday. Why the smell of something or the sound of a particular song can collapse decades in an instant and return you fully to a moment you thought was gone. The unconscious holds everything, without chronology, without the organizing logic of before and after. And alongside that, it has no use for the kind of logic the conscious mind relies on either. It does not argue. It does not reason in steps. It does not sort things into contradictions and say this cannot be true if that is also true. It holds opposites easily. It lives in paradox and overlap in the space between definitions. A place where you can love and fear the same thing, where loss and beauty exist side by side, where nothing is only one thing. And when the unconscious wants to communicate, when it reaches toward awareness trying to pass something across, it does so not in words and not in arguments. It speaks in symbols, in images, in feelings, in the strange and vivid language of dreams. A house that keeps appearing in your sleep may be a map of the self. Water may carry the weight of emotion. A figure that follows you through dream after dream may be carrying a message you have not yet found the words for. The unconscious is not trying to confuse you. It is speaking in the only language it has. The language of the body, of image, of felt sense. Ancient and imprecise and extraordinarily rich. And all of this, everything we have just touched on together, is happening inside you right now. The vast unconscious, making up 90 to 95% of your inner world. The emotions moving faster than thought. The patterns of intuition, quietly assembled from a lifetime of experience. The decisions already forming in the deep. The habits running smoothly without effort. The timeless, symbolic, logic-free depths of a mind that is so much larger than the sliver of it we usually call ourselves. These hidden processes are not separate from you. They are not other. They are the foundation everything else is built upon. The quiet water that carries the boat of your conscious life. And tonight, as you rest, as your body grows warm and heavy and still, all of that continues. The unconscious keeps working, keeps tending, keeps doing what it has always done. You don't need to understand it. You don't need to direct it. You only need to rest. Let the surface of the mind grow still. Let the thoughts slow. Let the breath deepen and drift. You are still here, and that is a wonderful thing. Perhaps your body has settled a little more deeply into wherever you are lying. Perhaps your breath has found its own quiet rhythm, slow and easy and entirely your own. Perhaps the thoughts that were moving through your mind a little while ago have begun to thin out, the way clouds sometimes thin at the end of a long afternoon, leaving behind something clearer and softer and more open. You don't need to do anything with any of that. Just notice it. Just let it be. We are going to continue our journey tonight, still moving inward, still descending gently into the depths of that extraordinary hidden world we began to explore together. Tonight we go a little further in. We are going to look at the map. More than a century ago, a Viennese physician named Sigmund Freud sat with his patients and listened, really listened, in a way that was quite unusual for his time. He listened not just to what they said, but to what they couldn't quite say, to the gaps, to the hesitations, to the dreams they brought him, strange and vivid and full of imagery that seemed to mean something, even if no one could immediately say what. And gradually, from all of that listening, he began to sketch a picture of the mind, a model, a way of understanding the invisible architecture of human inner life. It was not a perfect model. Science has refined it many times since, but it contained something true, something so clear and so useful that people are still reaching for it more than 100 years later. Freud compared the mind to an iceberg. Just let that image settle for a moment. An iceberg floating in cold and open water. Enormous, ancient, moving very slowly through a world that only ever sees a fraction of what it truly is. The tip of the iceberg, the part that rises above the waterline visible in the light of day, that is the conscious mind. This is the part we are most familiar with. The part that reads and speaks and plans and argues and makes decisions and tells us the story of who we are. It is the part that is awake right now, listening to this voice, following these words. It is real. It matters. But it is, as we explored before, only a very small portion of the whole. Just the visible tip of something immeasurably larger. Below the waterline, just beneath the surface, not quite visible but not unreachably deep, lies something that Freud called the preconscious. Think of the preconscious as a kind of waiting room. A place where memories and thoughts and feelings are stored that are not currently in your awareness, but that could be, with a little effort. They are retrievable, accessible, just resting quietly, just out of sight until something calls them forward. The name of a person you haven't thought of in years. The words to a song you loved as a teenager. The particular feeling of a summer afternoon from long ago. These things are not sitting at the front of your mind right now, but they are not gone either. They live in the preconscious, patient and intact, waiting for the right moment, the right trigger, the right question, to come rising back into the light. Let your arms grow heavy now, your legs, the back of your neck. There is a particular kind of heaviness that comes just before sleep, a softening, a gentle release. Let yourself move toward it. And then, beneath the preconscious, beneath the threshold of easy retrieval, stretching down into depths that ordinary consciousness cannot simply reach into and pull from, that is where the unconscious begins. The massive, hidden base of the iceberg. The part that makes up most of the whole. The part that shapes the surface while remaining invisible to it. This is where Freud believed the truly formative material lived. The memories too charged or too painful or too overwhelming to be held in conscious awareness. The desires that could not be acknowledged. The fears that had no name. The old wounds, the forgotten experiences, the residue of everything that had ever happened and been pushed below the surface. Not because it disappeared, but because holding it consciously was too much to bear. The unconscious, in Freud's understanding, was not empty space. It was extraordinarily full. And it was dynamic. It exerted a constant, quiet pressure on everything above it, on mood, on behavior, on the choices we make, on the people we are drawn to and the patterns we keep returning to, all without ever quite surfacing into the light. Now, alongside this image of the iceberg, Freud also gave us a second map, a different way of seeing the same territory. He described the psyche as being organized into three structures. Not three separate places exactly, but three different principles, three different forces, each with its own logic and its own way of moving through the world. He called them the ID, the ego, and the superego. The first of these, the oldest, the deepest, the most primitive, is the ID. The ID operates entirely on what Freud called the pleasure principle. It wants what it wants, and it wants it immediately. It has no patience. No interest in consequence, no awareness of other people's needs or feelings. It is pure impulse, pure appetite, pure drive. The raw, unfiltered energy of biological life. The ID does not know the word no. It does not understand later. It does not negotiate or compromise or consider. It simply wants, with a directness and an intensity that the more civilized parts of the mind spend a great deal of energy managing. You can hear the ID in a small child who has not yet learned to wait. In the sudden, irrational craving that arrives in the middle of the night. In the flash of anger or hunger or longing that arises before you even know what you are feeling. It is not bad. It is not wrong. It is simply ancient, the oldest part of us. And then there is the ego. The ego is the part that has to live in the world. that has to wake up in the morning and go about the day and maintain relationships and meet obligations and somehow navigate the constant tension between what the ID wants and what reality will actually allow. The ego mediates, that is its essential function. It stands between the raw desire of the ID and the hard limits of the world outside, and it tries, constantly, tirelessly, to find some workable middle path. Some way of getting enough of what we need without losing everything else in the process. The ego operates on the reality principle. It thinks ahead. It weighs consequences. It considers timing. It understands that sometimes you cannot have what you want right now, that sometimes you must wait or adapt or let go. This is exhausting work in some ways. And it explains why people who are under enormous stress, whose ego is working very hard to hold things together, often feel depleted in a way that sleep alone doesn't quite seem to fix. Because the management never entirely stops. Even in sleep, the ego is still there, still trying to hold the balance. Your breath is easy now, soft, in and out, in and out. Let the mind drift wherever it wants to go. There is nowhere it needs to be. The third structure is the superego. If the ID is the voice that says I want, the superego is the voice that says you should not. The superego is the internalized moral authority. The accumulated rules and expectations and judgments absorbed from parents, from teachers, from culture, from every authority figure who ever shaped our understanding of what is acceptable and what is not. It is the conscience in a sense, but a conscience that can sometimes be demanding, or punishing, or impossible to satisfy. The superego enforces its rules not from the outside but from within. It has become part of the architecture itself, woven into the structure of the psyche so thoroughly that its voice can be very hard to distinguish from one's own. The standard it holds is not always the standard of the world as it is. It is often the standard of an ideal, a perfect version of the self that the actual self can never quite achieve. And so the ego finds itself managing not only the pressure from the ID below, but the judgment of the superego above. Squeezed, in a sense, between appetite and ideal. Doing its best, always in a space that offers very little room for rest. Understanding this, just holding the image of it, can bring a kind of tenderness toward yourself, toward others, toward the ordinary human difficulty of being a person trying to get through the day with all of this going on inside. Now, one of the preconscious mind's most important roles is that of a filter. The preconscious does not simply store memories that are waiting to be recalled. It also acts as a kind of gatekeeper between the unconscious and conscious awareness. It decides, or rather participates in deciding, what gets through and what does not. Much of the material in the deep unconscious stays there precisely because the preconscious allows it to, because bringing it fully into awareness would be disruptive, or destabilizing, or simply too much to hold alongside the ordinary demands of daily life. This is not deception. It is protection. A built-in mechanism for maintaining a degree of stability, of functioning, of being able to move through the world without being constantly overwhelmed by everything that lives in the depths. The filter is not perfect. Sometimes things get through that surprise us. A sudden wave of emotion with no clear cause, a dream that leaves a strange residue, a moment of inexplicable sadness or joy that seems to come from nowhere. These are often the places where something from below has pressed through the filter, asking in its own way to be seen. Let those thoughts drift now, like leaves on slow water, each one passing, each one moving gently on. Alongside Freud's model of the personal unconscious, the individual reservoir of repressed memory and hidden desire, a thinker who came after him, a man named Carl Jung, offered something even larger. Jung spoke of the personal unconscious, the layer unique to each individual, containing their forgotten experiences, their private wounds, their particular history. Much like what Freud described, though understood in a somewhat different way. But Jung went further. He proposed that beneath the personal unconscious, deeper still, at a level that no individual life could fully account for, there lay something he called the collective unconscious. A layer of the psyche shared not by one person but by all people, not learned from experience, not accumulated through a single lifetime, but inherited, passed down through the deepest channels of human biology, like a shared inner landscape that every human being who has ever lived has carried within them. The collective unconscious, Jung believed, is the place where the great universal patterns live. The patterns that appear again and again across every culture, every mythology, every religion that has ever existed on this earth. The same figures and themes and stories surfacing in the dreams of a child in one part of the world and the sacred texts of a civilization on the other side of it. The hero who descends into darkness and returns transformed. The great mother, nurturing and terrible. The wise old figure who appears at the threshold of the unknown. The shadow, the trickster, the divine child. These patterns, these archetypes, as Jung called them, are not metaphors that humans invented and spread to one another. They arise from somewhere inside us. From a depth that precedes language, precedes culture, precedes any individual story. They are the grammar of the human soul. Think about what that means for a moment as you rest here in the quiet. That somewhere inside you, beneath the layer of your personal memories and your private history, beneath even the part of you that feels uniquely and particularly you, there is a layer that connects you to every human being who has ever lived. To the people who painted animals on the walls of dark caves by firelight 50,000 years ago. To the people who built great stone circles and watched the stars for meaning. The ego is the part that has to live in the world. That has to wake up in the morning and go about the day and maintain relationships and meet obligations and somehow navigate the constant tension between what the ID wants and what reality will actually allow. The ego mediates. That is its essential function. It stands between the raw desire of the ID and the hard limits of the world outside, and it tries, constantly, tirelessly, to find some workable middle path. Some way of getting enough of what we need without losing everything else in the process. The ego operates on the reality principle. It thinks ahead. It weighs consequences. It considers timing. It understands that sometimes you cannot have what you want right now, that sometimes you must wait or adapt or let go. This is exhausting work in some ways. And it explains why people who are under enormous stress, whose ego is working very hard to hold things together, often feel depleted in a way that sleep alone doesn't quite seem to fix. Because the management never entirely stops. Even in sleep, the ego is still there, still trying to hold the balance. Your breath is easy now. Soft. In and out. In and out. Let the mind drift wherever it wants to go. There is nowhere it needs to be. The third structure is the superego. If the ID is the voice that says I want, the superego is the voice that says you should not. The superego is the internalized moral authority. The accumulated rules and expectations and judgments absorbed from parents, from teachers, from culture, from every authority figure who ever shaped our understanding of what is acceptable and what is not. It is the conscience in a sense, but a conscience that can sometimes be demanding, or punishing, or impossible to satisfy. The superego enforces its rules not from the outside but from within. It has become part of the architecture itself, woven into the structure of the psyche so thoroughly that its voice can be very hard to distinguish from one's own. The standard it holds is not always the standard of the world as it is. It is often the standard of an ideal, a perfect version of the self that the actual self can never quite achieve. And so the ego finds itself managing not only the pressure from the ID below, but the judgment of the superego above. Squeezed, in a sense, between appetite and ideal. Doing its best, always in a space that offers very little room for rest. Understanding this, just holding the image of it, can bring a kind of tenderness toward yourself, toward others, toward the ordinary human difficulty of being a person trying to get through the day with all of this going on inside. Now, one of the preconscious mind's most important roles is that of a filter. The preconscious does not simply store memories that are waiting to be recalled. It also acts as a kind of gatekeeper between the unconscious and conscious awareness. It decides, or rather participates in deciding what gets through and what does not. Much of the material in the deep unconscious stays there precisely because the preconscious allows it to, because bringing it fully into awareness would be disruptive or destabilizing, or simply too much to hold alongside the ordinary demands of daily life. This is not deception. It is protection. A built-in mechanism for maintaining a degree of stability, of functioning, of being able to move through the world without being constantly overwhelmed by everything that lives in the depths. The filter is not perfect. Sometimes things get through that surprise us. A sudden wave of emotion with no clear cause, a dream that leaves a strange residue, a moment of inexplicable sadness or joy that seems to come from nowhere. These are often the places where something from below has pressed through the filter, asking in its own way to be seen. Let those thoughts drift now, like leaves on slow water, each one passing, each one moving gently on. Alongside Freud's model of the personal unconscious, the individual reservoir of repressed memory and hidden desire, a thinker who came after him, a man named Carl Jung, offered something even larger. Jung spoke of the personal unconscious, the layer unique to each individual, containing their forgotten experiences, their private wounds, their particular history. Much like what Freud described, though understood in a somewhat different way. But Jung went further. He proposed that beneath the personal unconscious, deeper still, at a level that no individual life could fully account for, there lay something he called the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche shared not by one person but by all people, not learned from experience, not accumulated through a single lifetime, but inherited, passed down through the deepest channels of human biology, like a shared inner landscape that every human being who has ever lived has carried within them. The collective unconscious, Jung believed, is the place where the great universal patterns live. The patterns that appear again and again across every culture, every mythology, every religion that has ever existed on this earth. The same figures and themes and stories surfacing in the dreams of a child in one part of the world and the sacred texts of a civilization on the other side of it. The hero who descends into darkness and returns transformed. The great mother, nurturing and terrible. The wise old figure who appears at the threshold of the unknown. The shadow, the trickster, the divine child. These patterns, these archetypes, as Jung called them, are not metaphors that humans invented and spread to one another. They arise from somewhere inside us. From a depth that precedes language, precedes culture, precedes any individual story. They are the grammar of the human soul. Think about what that means for a moment as you rest here in the quiet. That somewhere inside you, beneath the layer of your personal memories and your private history, beneath even the part of you that feels uniquely and particularly you, there is a layer that connects you to every human being who has ever lived. To the people who painted animals on the walls of dark caves by firelight 50,000 years ago. To the people who built great stone circles and watched the stars for meaning. To the mothers who have held their children in every century, in every corner of the world. To the dreamers and the wanderers and the ones who sat, as you are sitting now, wondering about the nature of the mind. You share something with all of them. Not a memory, not a language, something older than either, something structural, something built into the very depths of what it means to be human. The collective unconscious is not a poetic idea. It is, if Jung was right, and a great deal of evidence suggests he was onto something real, a genuine layer of your psyche, part of the architecture, part of the iceberg drifting through the deep. So we have traveled quite a distance tonight, and yet we have barely moved at all. We have visited the iceberg, the conscious tip, bright and visible, doing the work of the day. The preconscious, just below the surface, holding everything that might be remembered, filtering what comes through. And the vast, dark, ancient base of the unconscious itself, shaped by personal history and perhaps, by something even larger than personal history. We have met the ID with its tireless wanting, the ego doing its quiet, exhausting work of balance, the superego holding its demanding ideal, each one a part of the whole, each one doing what it was built to do. And we have stood for just a moment at the edge of something almost incomprehensibly large, the collective unconscious, the shared human depth, the place where you and every other person who has ever lived are, in some quiet and fundamental way, the same. All of this is inside you right now, all of it resting, all of it continuing in the background without your assistance. Let the map dissolve now. Let the structures and the names drift away like smoke. What remains is simpler, quieter, just the breath, just the darkness behind your eyes, just the slow, easy falling that happens when you stop trying to stay at the surface. Sink into it. Let yourself go down. Down into the preconscious where old memories dream. Down past the threshold where the filter grows soft. Down into the deep. There is nothing to fear there. Only the vast, quiet, ancient wholeness of everything you are. Drift, rest, sleep. You are still here. Still breathing. Still resting. Still letting the weight of the day settle further and further away from you, like sediment drifting slowly down through still water, coming to rest somewhere quiet and undisturbed at the bottom. There is nothing you need to hold on to tonight. Nothing that requires your attention. The world outside this moment is doing perfectly well without you, and it will continue to do so while you simply rest. If any thoughts have wandered in since we last spoke, small worries, unfinished ideas, the residue of the day, just notice them gently and let them pass. They are only visitors. They don't need to stay. In our first segment, we discovered just how vast the unconscious truly is, that great 9/10 hidden ocean of mental life that quietly shapes everything we feel and choose and become. In our second, we explored the architecture of that inner world, the iceberg model, the ID and ego and superego, the personal unconscious, and the astonishing possibility of something even deeper, a layer of psyche shared across all of humanity. Tonight we go deeper still. We are going to spend some time with the ancient patterns themselves. The word itself comes from the Greek, archi meaning first or original, typos meaning pattern or imprint, a first pattern, an original imprint. And that is exactly what an archetype is in the psychological sense. A universal pattern, not invented by any one culture, not taught from one person to another, but arising from the deep structure of the human psyche itself. Something built into us, the way certain shapes are built into crystals, the way certain songs are built into birds. Archetypes are not images exactly. They are more like the invisible molds that images are poured into. They are the underlying shapes that human imagination keeps reaching for, across every era and every culture that has ever existed, because those shapes correspond to something real in the inner world. The Great Mother, the Wise Elder, the Trickster, the Hero, the Eternal Child, the Destroyer who is also a creator. These figures appear in the myths of ancient Greece and in the folk tales of West Africa, in the sacred stories of indigenous peoples of the Americas and in the religious texts of ancient India, in the fairy tales of Northern Europe and in the dreams of people alive right now, tonight, in every corner of the world. Not because the stories were shared, but because the patterns were already there, waiting, in the same depths of the psyche that every human being carries. Myths are one of the great channels through which archetypes find expression. Not myths in the dismissive sense, not merely stories, not falsehoods dressed up in dramatic clothing, but myths in the truest sense, sacred narratives that carry the weight of something real, something felt, something true at a level that ordinary language struggles to reach. When a culture tells the story of a god who dies and is reborn, as so many cultures independently have told, they are not describing a historical event. They are giving form to an archetypal pattern that lives inside every human being who has ever faced loss and found, against all expectation, that something in them continued. That spring comes back. that after the longest night, light returns. The myth holds the pattern, and the pattern encountered in the story resonates in the deep because something in us already knows it, because we have lived it or are living it or will live it, because it is written into the architecture of the psyche itself. And dreams do the same work privately. What myths do for a culture, dreams do for the individual. They speak in symbols. They bring the archetypes into personal form. Let your body go a little heavier now. A pleasant, soft heaviness, like warm sand. Your arms, your legs, the back of your head, drifting. Let us spend a moment with the shadow. In Jung's understanding, the shadow is one of the most important and most misunderstood of the archetypes. It is not evil, though it is often spoken of as though it were. It is something more nuanced and in many ways more interesting than that. The shadow is the part of the self that has been rejected, not destroyed, not gone, simply pushed to one side out of sight into the darker regions of the psyche, because at some point it was judged unacceptable, too aggressive perhaps, too needy, too sexual, too sad, too loud, too strange, too much of something that did not fit the image of the person we were trying to be or the person others needed us to be. Every quality we have disowned in ourselves, every impulse we have silenced, every feeling we have been ashamed of, every part of our nature that did not fit, those things do not disappear. They accumulate in the shadow. They wait there in the dark, patient and persistent. Jung believed that one of the most important journeys a person could undertake was not to eliminate the shadow, which cannot be done, but to befriend it, to turn toward it, to recognize the energy that lives there, the vitality that has been locked away, and to find some way of integrating it back into the whole. The shadow is not the enemy. It is simply the part of you that has been waiting in the dark to be welcomed home. And then there is the persona, where the shadow is the self we hide from others, and from ourselves, the persona is the self we show. It is the social mask, the face we assemble each morning and carry out into the world. Professional, polished, appropriate. The persona is not dishonest exactly. Parts of it are genuinely us, but parts of it are also performance, adaptation, the accumulated adjustments we have made over a lifetime to fit ourselves into spaces that were not always shaped to hold us. To know that you wear a persona, to be able to take it off, at least in the quiet privacy of your own inner life, is itself a kind of freedom. Breathe in and breathe out. The night is soft around you. Let the mask dissolve. There is no one here to perform for, just you exactly as you are. Jung also spoke of two archetypes that live at a slightly different layer of the psyche, the anima and the animus. The anima is the feminine aspect that lives within the male psyche. The animus is the masculine aspect that lives within the female. Within each of us, regardless of our gender, there lives a range of qualities that our culture tends to sort into masculine and feminine, strength and tenderness, logic and intuition, action and receptivity. The anima and animus carry the undeveloped half, the qualities we have not yet learned to claim. And they often appear in projection, in the person we fall in love with, for instance, who seems to possess exactly the qualities we most lack or most secretly yearn for. To encounter the anima or animus consciously, to recognize these inner figures and begin to integrate what they carry, is to move toward a greater wholeness. And wholeness in Jung's system has a name, the self. Not the ego, not the conscious, managing, decision-making self we tend to identify with, but something larger, the totality of the psyche, the conscious and the unconscious together, the light and the shadow, all of it in its entirety held in a kind of dynamic living unity. The self, in Jung's understanding, is both what we already are and what we are always in the process of becoming. It is the center and the circumference at once. Jung sometimes represented the self as a mandala, a circular pattern perfectly balanced, radiating outward from a still central point. Because the circle is one of the archetypes, it appears everywhere that humans try to represent wholeness. Let your thoughts move in slow circles now, wide and soft and easy, round and round with no edges, no corners, no place where things get stuck. Now there is one idea from Jung's later work that deserves a quiet moment of its own, an idea called synchronicity. Jung noticed something he could not explain through ordinary cause and effect, coincidences that were too meaningful to dismiss. An inner event, a dream, a thought, an image arising in the mind that corresponded, sometimes startlingly, with something happening in the outer world. He called this synchronicity, a meaningful coincidence, a moment when the boundary between the inner world and the outer world seems to become unusually thin. You may have experienced something like this yourself, thinking of someone just before they call, dreaming of an event that then occurs, finding that a book falls open to exactly the page you needed. Perhaps the inner and the outer are not as separate as they appear. Archetypal patterns appear not only in myths and in dreams, but in the stories that cultures pass down to their children. Fairy tales. Think of the stories you heard when you were very young. The girl lost in the dark forest. The third son who succeeds where his brothers failed. The beast who conceals a hidden beauty. The sleeping princess waiting to be awakened. These are not arbitrary plots. They are archetypal journeys, encoded in the language of symbol and image, designed to speak directly to the deep structure of the psyche. The forest is the unconscious. The quest is the process of individuation. The monster is the shadow. The magical helper is the inner wisdom that appears when it is most needed. Fairy tales are not childish things. They are extraordinarily sophisticated maps of inner experience. And finally, rituals. Human beings have always performed rituals. In every culture that has ever existed, people have gathered to enact certain sequences of action, of movement, of word, of symbol, to mark the passages of life, to connect with something larger than themselves. At a deeper level, rituals create a deliberate opening between the individual and the collective unconscious. They are speaking, in the symbolic language that the deep psyche understands, to the archetypal patterns that live there. When a person participates in a genuine ritual, with real attention, real intention, something shifts, something in the deep responds. The boundary between the individual and the collective grows thin. This is why ritual still matters, even in a world that has largely set it aside. Because the collective unconscious does not change. Because the archetypes are still there, still alive, still waiting to be acknowledged. You have traveled a long way tonight. All of these patterns are part of your inheritance. They came with you when you were born. They have been working in you all your life, shaping your dreams, your longings, your fears, the stories that move you most deeply, the moments that feel inexplicably like recognition. You did not have to earn them. They are simply yours. Let the patterns rest now. Let the names dissolve. The circle closes. The center holds. Your breath moves in and out. In and out. The shadow sleeps beside you, not as enemy but as companion. The self, which was never lost, turns slowly in the dark like a lamp that has always been lit. You are whole. You are ancient. You are held. Sleep. You are still here, still breathing, still held in that warm, familiar darkness that has been gathering around you all evening. We have explored the vast architecture of the unconscious, its ancient patterns, and the invisible biological forces that drive behavior from below the threshold of awareness. Tonight, we turn to the hidden machinery of behavior itself. Because beneath everything you do, beneath every decision, every reaction, every habit, there are forces at work. We begin at the very beginning, with the instinctual drives. Long before any individual human being develops a personality, there are drives, biological imperatives, wired into the deep structure of the nervous system, that orient the organism toward life and away from death. Freud identified two great opposing drives that he believed lay at the root of all human motivation. The first he called eros, the life drive, the force that reaches toward connection, toward creativity, toward growth and union and the binding together of things. Eros is what draws us toward other people, toward beauty, toward the making of things, art, music, children, relationships, ideas. It is the drive that says yes to life. You feel eros when you fall in love, when a piece of music opens something in your chest, when you are so absorbed in a creative act that time disappears. Eros is the great weaver, the force that wants to bind things together into something larger and more beautiful than any single thread could be alone. And then there is Thanatos, the death drive, the force that moves in the opposite direction, toward dissolution, toward aggression, toward the breaking apart of things, toward the return of the living to the unliving, toward silence, toward stillness, toward the undoing of the structures that Eros works so hard to build. Freud insisted, and a great deal of human history would seem to support him, that the drive toward destruction is just as real, just as fundamental. In its more benign expressions, Thanatos is also the force behind necessary endings, the ability to let go, to allow what has run its course to finally, gently cease, to make room through dissolution for whatever Eros will build next. Eros and Thanatos, creation and dissolution, the in-breath and the out-breath of the psyche, both necessary, both always present. Let your body breathe now in its own time, and out, building and releasing, building and releasing. Now we move from the philosophical to the neurological. Deep within the structure of your brain, older than the cortex, older than language, older than conscious thought, sits a small almond-shaped cluster of neurons called the amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's alarm system, its threat detector. In an instant, faster than conscious thought, the amygdala can flood the body with stress hormones. Heart rate accelerates, muscles tense, breathing shallows. The whole organism mobilizes, preparing to fight or to flee. This is an ancient system, evolved to protect creatures in genuinely life-threatening situations. The difficulty in the modern world is that the amygdala cannot always distinguish between a physical threat and a psychological one, between a predator in the undergrowth and a difficult email. Understanding this does not make it stop, but it does change the relationship to it. To recognize that the alarm is ancient, that it is trying to protect you, is to be able to meet it with something like compassion. Soften the jaw now, the shoulders, the hands. The alarm is not needed tonight. Everything is still. Everything is safe. There is another piece of neural architecture worth knowing about: mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are cells in the brain that fire not only when you perform an action yourself, but when you observe someone else performing that same action. When you watch someone wince in pain, something in your nervous system responds as though you had experienced the pain yourself. Mirror neurons are thought to underlie some of our most essentially human capacities. Empathy. The social contagion of laughter, of yawning, of anxiety, of calm. You are never as separate as you think you are. Now, consider the gentle, invisible architecture of influence that surrounds you in every waking moment. Priming. Priming refers to the way that exposure to one stimulus, a word, an image, a sensation, can subtly and automatically shift the way we respond to everything that comes after it. We are not passive receivers of the world around us, but we are far more permeable than we tend to assume. The unconscious is always taking everything in, always incorporating context. Drift a little now. Let the thoughts grow soft and loose, like mist, like the last light before dark, not holding anything, just floating. The brain learns through connection. The neurons that fire together wire together. This is the principle known as Hebbian learning. When two neurons activate at the same time, repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. The pathway becomes more efficient. What once required effort gradually becomes automatic, grooved in. A well-worn track that the mind slips into without being asked. This is how every skill you have ever learned moved from effortful to easy. The brain is always learning, always finding the patterns that repeat and automating them. Your habits, the morning rituals, the emotional responses, the ways of moving through the world that feel so natural you have forgotten they were ever chosen, are the accumulated record of everything the brain has decided is reliable enough to run without supervision. And then there are heuristics. The mind, faced with the infinite complexity of the world, cannot deliberate on every decision. And so the unconscious develops shortcuts. Fast, automatic, efficient ways of reaching good enough answers without engaging the slow machinery of conscious reasoning. The heuristic that says familiar is safe. The one that says more expensive must be better. These are not the products of deliberate reasoning. They are the outputs of a fast, pattern-matching, unconscious decision system. They are also the source of many of our errors. The shortcuts that work well in most situations can lead us astray in specific situations where they do not apply. And finally, one more idea. Perhaps the most quietly astonishing of all, predictive coding. Your brain is not primarily a device for receiving and processing the world as it is. It is primarily a device for predicting the world as it will be. At every moment, your brain is generating a continuous, unconscious model of reality, a set of predictions about what is about to happen. Most of what you perceive in any given moment is not raw sensory data. It is your brain's prediction, confirmed or slightly adjusted by incoming information. The unconscious is not only where the past is stored. It is where the future is being continuously assembled, moment by moment, in the form of prediction. So much driving. So much quiet, automatic, below-the-surface architecture of force and influence and biological imperative that moves through you at every moment. The great dual currents of Eros and Thanatos. The amygdala always watching, always ready. The mirror neurons connecting you to every face you see. The priming, the heuristics, the ceaseless unconscious labor of prediction. All of it happening in you right now. None of it requiring your direction. Let the forces rest. Let the drives grow still. The amygdala is quiet. There is no threat tonight, only stillness. Let the ancient machinery of the mind run quietly in the background, keeping you, tending you, carrying you gently into sleep. You are safe. You are held. You are already, even now, on your way. Drift. Sleep. You are still here, still breathing. Still held in that warm, familiar darkness. Tonight, we turn towards something closer to the daily experience of being a person navigating a complicated world. We are going to spend some time with the mind's defenses. To understand why the mind needs defenses at all, it helps to sit for a moment with the simple, tender fact of human vulnerability. We are feeling creatures living in a world that does not always meet us gently. The mind, faced with material it cannot yet hold, does not simply shut down. It adapts. It finds ways to continue functioning, to maintain some workable sense of self, some degree of stability, even in the presence of things it has not yet found a way to fully face. These adaptations are defense mechanisms, and they are, at their core, acts of survival, acts of protection. The mind doing the best it can with what it has. They are not weaknesses. They are the evidence of a psyche that refused to break. The most fundamental of all the defenses is repression. Repression is the process by which painful, frightening, or unacceptable memories, feelings, or impulses are pushed out of conscious awareness and held in the unconscious, below the threshold of ordinary recall. Not forgotten exactly. The repressed material does not disappear. It remains in the deep, intact and charged, continuing to exert its influence on mood and behavior, but no longer visible to the conscious mind. Repression happens automatically. It is not a decision. The process operates below awareness, triggered by the psyche's assessment that this particular material is more than can currently be safely held. The repressed always seeks return, not to punish, but because it needs, eventually, to be met, to be seen, to be held in the light of an awareness that has grown strong enough to bear what it could not bear before. Let the breath come easily, in through the nose, slow and full, out through the mouth, soft and long. Each exhale releasing just a little more. You are safe here. Closely related to repression is denial. Where repression hides specific memories or impulses, denial operates at the level of perception itself. It is the mind's refusal to acknowledge a disturbing truth that is, at some level, already known. Denial is the voice that says this is not happening, that insists the relationship is fine when it clearly is not, that waves away the symptom that might require attention. Denial is often the first response to grief, to devastating news, to the collapse of something important. It is the initial buffer, the breathing space, the moment of not yet before the slow, difficult work of acknowledgement begins. Then there is rationalization. Rationalization is the process of constructing logical, reasonable-sounding justifications for behaviors, feelings, or impulses that actually arise from unconscious sources. The real reason for the action is not the stated reason, but the stated reason is so plausible that it is very difficult, even for the person doing the rationalizing, to see through it. We reach for the extra drink and tell ourselves we have earned it. We make the unkind remark and find a dozen reasons why it was actually the honest thing to say. The unconscious impulse comes first. The rational explanation follows, assembled in its wake, like a press secretary issuing a statement to explain what the principal has already decided to do. Drift a little now, the thoughts becoming lighter, less insistent. Like clouds, they come and go. Projection is one of the most fascinating of the defenses, and one of the most important to understand. Projection is the process by which traits, feelings, or impulses that are unacceptable within the self are attributed instead to someone else. The person who cannot acknowledge their own anger finds anger everywhere they look. The one who cannot admit their own envy is surrounded, it seems, by jealous people. What is being projected is real. The feeling, the impulse, the trait. It genuinely exists. It simply cannot be located where it actually lives, and so it is located outside, in others. Either way, what we see most intensely in others, whether we are drawn to it or repelled by it, often has something to tell us about ourselves. Reaction formation is one of the more complex of the defenses. It describes the process by which an unacceptable feeling is not simply hidden, but actively converted into its opposite. The person who feels an attraction they cannot permit themselves to acknowledge may become intensely hostile toward its object. The one who carries a great deal of doubt may perform with an almost aggressive certainty. One of the telltale signs of reaction formation is intensity, a degree of vigor or rigidity in the opposite position that seems more than the situation requires. And then there is regression. Under sufficient stress, the psyche sometimes moves backward in its development, returns to an earlier, simpler, more protected way of being. The adult who becomes uncharacteristically petulant when ill. The capable professional who, in conflict with an authority figure, suddenly feels helplessly small. This is regression, and it is not, in itself, a failure. It is a reminder that inside every adult there lives the child who first learned what the world was. To meet regression in oneself with gentleness, rather than shame, is to extend to the frightened inner child the care it is asking for. The breath is very soft now, slow and steady. Let the body be exactly as it is. Nothing to adjust, nothing to correct. Introjection is a defense that works by taking something from the outside and making it internal. Introjection as a defense refers to the incorporation of external attitudes or judgments that serve a protective function. The child who grows up with a harsh, critical caregiver does not simply experience that criticism externally. They internalize it. They take the critical voice and make it their own. The introject becomes the inner voice, the one that says you are not enough, the one that is often mistaken for truth, because it has been there so long that it is nearly impossible to recognize it as something that was ever from outside at all. Sublimation is the most generative of the defenses, the process by which raw, difficult, potentially destructive impulses are transmuted into something creative, productive, and genuinely valuable. The aggressive energy that cannot be expressed directly becomes athletic excellence. The erotic desire that has no acceptable outlet becomes art. The anxiety about mortality becomes philosophy. Sublimation is why so much of what we consider the highest achievements of human civilization may have their deepest roots in the very impulses and conflicts that culture most thoroughly prohibits. To sublimate is not to deny the original impulse. It is to honor it in the only form available. To make, from whatever the inner world has pressed and accumulated, something that has beauty or meaning or use. Defense mechanisms, in all of their variety and ingenuity, share a common quality. They involve some degree of distortion of reality. This is not a condemnation. As we have said, these defenses exist because they were needed. But the cost is real. The energy required to maintain the adjustments. The ways in which the distortions begin to shape how we see everything. And many of the difficulties we think of as neuroses trace their roots back to unresolved repression, to material that could not be held consciously at the time of its occurrence, and was therefore pushed below, where it did not dissolve, did not lose its charge, did not stop asking to be finally, fully met. This is not tonight's work. Tonight's work is simpler and kinder. Tonight you only need to rest. To let the defenses do exactly what they are doing, whatever they need to do, without judgment, without pressure. They have protected you well. They have been, in their own imperfect and sometimes costly way, the evidence of a remarkable resilience, of a mind that refused, under whatever circumstances it found itself, to simply give up. You can be grateful to them tonight. They were doing the best they could. You have always been doing the best you could. Let the mind grow very quiet now, very still. There is nothing to justify tonight. Nothing to project, nothing to reverse, nothing to regress from. There is only this, the breath, the dark, the slow, sweet loosening of everything that has been held for just a little while longer than it needed to be. Let it go. Let it all gently go. You are safe in the deep sleep. You are still here, still breathing, still held in the quiet that has been deepening around you all evening. Tonight we turn toward the place you are nearly in, the territory that lies just across the threshold from where you are right now. We are going to talk about dreams. Freud called them the royal road to the unconscious, not a side path, not a minor channel. The royal road, the most direct, most revealing, most richly informative route into the hidden depths of the psyche that any of us ever travel. Every night, without effort, without intention, the sleeping mind opens a door that the waking mind keeps carefully closed. The defenses soften, the filters relax, and what lives in the unconscious begins to move. It does not move loudly. It moves in the way the unconscious has always communicated, in images, in feelings, in the strange and vivid language of symbol. One of the most important things Freud noticed about dreams is that they are not transparent. They do not show what they mean. They disguise it. The content of a dream, the story as it appears, Freud called the manifest content. This is the surface, the visible part. And beneath the manifest content, encoded within it, lies what Freud called the latent content, the actual meaning, the real wish or fear or unresolved conflict that the dream is attempting to express. The manifest content is the disguise. The latent content is the face beneath it. The dream allows the unconscious to speak while the ego continues in some measure to sleep. Let your eyes be completely still now behind their closed lids. Let the mind wander wherever it wants to go, just drifting. Two of the main processes by which the latent content is transformed into manifest content are displacement and condensation. Displacement is the process by which the emotional weight of a dream is shifted away from its actual source and attached instead to something else, something less threatening. You dream of losing something small and ordinary, a set of keys perhaps, and wake with a grief entirely disproportionate to the loss. Because the dream was not about the keys. The keys were standing in for something else. Condensation works differently. It is the process by which multiple ideas, figures, feelings, or memories are merged into a single image or symbol in the dream. The person who appears in a dream may have the face of one individual, the voice of another, and the emotional significance of a third, all compressed into a single figure that carries all of it at once. And then there are the day residues. When Freud examined the content of dreams carefully, he noticed that they almost always contained some element drawn from the recent past, something that had happened during the preceding day or two. These fragments serve as raw material, a scaffolding upon which the deeper unconscious content arranges itself. The recent experience provides the form, and the older, more fundamental material attaches itself to this form, using it as a vehicle. The day provided the costume. The unconscious provided the player wearing it. Beneath all of the complexity of dream symbolism, Freud believed there was a single underlying principle organizing the dreaming mind: wish fulfillment. At the root of every dream, however strange, however anxiety-provoking, there is, Freud argued, a wish being expressed, something the dreamer wants, something the unconscious is reaching toward. Even the nightmare may contain, within its distress, a wish. Sometimes the wish to confront something that has been avoided. Sometimes the wish to be seen in one's fear. The dream is always, in some sense, trying to give us something. Your breathing is very slow now, very even. The softest possible rhythm in and out. The body perfectly still. The mind beginning to let go of its last hold on the waking world. Most dreaming occurs during REM sleep. REM, rapid eye movement, is a phase of sleep characterized by a paradox. The brain is as active during REM sleep as it is during waking, and yet the body is essentially paralyzed, the muscles held in a temporary stillness that prevents the dreaming person from acting out their dreams. What is the REM brain doing? It is processing emotions. During REM sleep, the brain revisits the emotional experiences of the day, and of longer ago too, and processes them. Strips the raw emotional charge from the memories, integrates them into the existing network of experience, allows the feeling to be metabolized, transformed. People who are deprived of REM sleep show significant impairment in emotional regulation. They become more reactive, less able to find perspective. REM sleep is doing something essential. It is the brain's nightly emotional processing, the overnight therapy session that no waking intervention can fully replace. And alongside REM sleep, in the slower stages known collectively as NREM sleep, something different but equally essential is happening. NREM sleep is the time when the brain builds and consolidates its mental schemas. During NREM sleep, the brain is quietly reviewing the day's learning, identifying what is important, strengthening the connections between new information and existing knowledge, weaving the threads of experience into the larger fabric of understanding. This is why a problem that seemed intractable at night can sometimes appear newly solvable in the morning. The brain has been working. The integration has happened. And holding all of this together is the extraordinary process of memory consolidation. The memories formed during the day are initially stored in a temporary, fragile state. Sleep is when they become permanent. During the night, the brain replays the day's experiences, often many times at accelerated speed. Each replay strengthens the neural pathways associated with the memory, makes the connection more robust, more durably woven into the existing structure of what is known. This is one of the most profound gifts of sleep. It is not passive. It is not wasted time. Every hour of good sleep is an hour of active, essential work. Think about that for a moment as you drift here in the dark. Right now, perhaps already, even as these words wash gently over you, your brain is beginning to do this work. The day is being received. The emotions are beginning their processing. The dreams that will come tonight are already being assembled. The unconscious is beginning to stir, to arrange itself, to find the images and symbols that will carry whatever needs to be carried through the night. You do not need to direct any of this. It will happen as it has always happened, every night of your life. The royal road is open tonight. The door that the waking mind keeps carefully guarded has begun, very slowly, to ease open. The defenses are softening. The preconscious filter is growing gauzy and permeable. Let it come. Whatever the night has to show you, let it come. You are safe in the dreaming as you are safe in the waking. Your body is very heavy now. Your mind very far from the concerns of the day. The REM sleep is coming, that brilliant biological theater in which the emotions of the day will be gently received and transformed. The dreams are coming, and you are ready. You have always been ready. You are crossing the threshold now. The royal road stretches out before you. Dream well. Sleep now. Go. You are still here, still breathing, still held in that deep, familiar quiet. Tonight we visit the laboratories, the scanning rooms, the research that has been quietly accumulating as scientists with extraordinary tools have turned their attention toward the brain and found in the data something that confirms what the poets and the depth psychologists had been saying all along. The unconscious is real. It is physical. It is visible in certain lights through certain instruments. Imagine lying very still inside a large humming machine. Around you, the quiet whirring of technology doing something extraordinary. The machine is called an fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance imaging scanner. It detects changes in blood flow to different regions of the brain, tiny shifts in oxygenation that correspond to neural activity. Where the brain is working, the blood flows. With this technology, researchers have been able to observe something remarkable. They can watch the brain process information and see with remarkable clarity how much of that processing occurs below the threshold of conscious awareness. Stimuli presented too briefly to be consciously perceived, images flashed for fractions of a second, still light up specific regions of the brain. The processing happens. The neural response is real and measurable. The unconscious is not an abstraction. Under the right conditions, in the right machine, you can watch it work. Let the body settle a little further. The kind of heaviness that has no anxiety in it, only rest. Some of the most thought-provoking experiments in modern neuroscience were conducted by a researcher named Benjamin Libet. Libet asked participants to flex their wrist whenever they felt like it, and to note the exact moment they became aware of the intention to move. What Libet found has been discussed and marveled at ever since. The brain began preparing for the movement approximately half a second before the participants reported becoming consciously aware of the intention to move. The body was already moving toward the decision before the conscious mind had arrived at it. We are, it seems, somewhat later to our own choices than we think. And when the mind is not focused on a particular task, when attention is not directed outward, what is the brain doing? For a long time, the assumption was that an unfocused brain was essentially an idle brain. But the fMRI changed that understanding entirely. When researchers scanned the brains of people who were simply resting, eyes closed, mind wandering, they found that a whole network of brain regions became more active, not less. This network became known as the default mode network. It is associated with self-referential thought, with the construction and maintenance of the narrative self, the story we tell about who we are, with remembering the past, imagining the future, considering the perspectives of other people. The unfocused mind is not an empty mind. It is a mind turned inward, doing the slow, invisible work of being a self. Drift there for a moment. Let the mind wander wherever it goes in the space between these sentences. There is no wrong direction. One of the organizing theories of consciousness in modern neuroscience is something called global workspace theory. The idea, in its simplest form, the brain contains many specialized processing systems, regions dedicated to vision, to language, to emotion, to memory, each doing its particular work, largely unconsciously. Consciousness arises when information is broadcast widely, when it is taken from its local processor and shared across the brain's global workspace. What determines what gets broadcast? The intensity of the signal, its relevance to current goals, the degree to which it deviates from what was expected. Consciousness is the exception, the special case, the spotlight that illuminates a tiny fraction of the extraordinary activity happening in the dark. And then there is the Bayesian brain. The brain, many researchers now believe, operates as a Bayesian inference machine. It takes what it already knows, the accumulated prior experience, and uses this to generate predictions about what is most likely to be true in the next moment. Those predictions are tested against actual incoming sensory data. If the data matches, the model remains intact. If the data contradicts the prediction, the brain generates a prediction error signal, and the model is updated. What you see is what the brain expects to see, adjusted slightly by what is actually there. The world as experienced is, at least in part, a construction, the brain's best current guess, continuously revised. Now, something perhaps more familiar in daily experience: cognitive dissonance. The uncomfortable feeling that arises when we hold two contradictory beliefs at once, or when our actions conflict with our stated values. The mind works hard to resolve it, usually not by changing the behavior but by adjusting the belief. And much of this reconciliation happens unconsciously. The adjustment is made below awareness. We are quite committed to feeling consistent, and the unconscious is quite skilled at engineering that feeling. Let the body breathe on its own now. No instruction, no direction, just the autonomous, intelligent rhythm of a body that knows exactly what it is doing. There is a state of experience that many people describe as among the finest available to human beings, a state in which the usual chatter of self-consciousness falls away. Time dissolves. Effort becomes effortless. This state is called flow. In flow, self-consciousness quiets. The inner critic goes silent. The neuroscience of flow shows something consistent. The prefrontal cortex, the region most associated with self-monitoring, shows decreased activity. What remains is not absence, but something fuller. The unconscious competence of deep skill, running freely without the interference of the watching self. Flow is what it feels like when the unconscious is given the wheel. And here is something extraordinary. The brain is not fixed. Neuroplasticity overturned the old assumption that the adult brain was essentially stable. The adult brain is, throughout the entire lifespan, capable of change, of forming new connections, of reorganizing its own structure in response to experience, learning, attention, and practice. The mind you have today is not the mind you were born with. It has been built incrementally by everything you have ever done and thought and felt. And it will continue to be built by everything you do from this moment forward. This is one of the most hopeful findings of modern science. The architecture of the mind is not a prison. It is a living structure capable of genuine transformation at any age. Now, something that takes us even further, beneath the level of the brain, into the very foundation of biological inheritance. Epigenetics studies not the sequence of the genes themselves, but the mechanisms by which genes are expressed, switched on or off, in response to environmental experience, stress, nourishment, trauma, love, neglect. These can alter patterns of gene expression in ways that persist across decades and possibly across generations. The unconscious inheritance you carry is not only psychological, it is biological, written into the very chemistry of the cells. And finally, the microbiome. The human gut contains somewhere in the region of 38 trillion microorganisms. Research over the past 2 decades has revealed that the gut and the brain are in constant bidirectional communication. The microorganisms of the gut produce neurotransmitters, including serotonin, of which the gut produces approximately 90% of the body's total supply. They shape the levels of anxiety and the capacity for resilience in ways that are only beginning to be understood. The unconscious reaches further than the mind. It reaches into the body, into the community of living things that the body hosts. So here we are, at the intersection of the ancient and the modern. The fMRI showing the unconscious brain at work. The lipid experiments suggesting decisions begin before awareness arrives. The default mode network quietly building the self. The Bayesian brain generating reality from prediction. Flow, the silence of self-consciousness. Neuroplasticity. Epigenetics. The microbiome. All of it pointing in the same direction. The conscious mind is sitting always on top of something vastly larger, something ancient and complex and beautiful and strange. You have been lying here through a long and extraordinary journey. Tonight you are not the researcher. Tonight you are the one being cared for. Lie still. Breathe. Let the vast, intelligent, modern and ancient architecture of your unconscious mind receive you. It knows what to do. It has always known. Sleep. You are still here, still breathing, still held in that deep, soft darkness. If all of this extraordinary inner life is happening below awareness, is there any way to meet it? To reach toward it deliberately? The answer, which has been discovered and rediscovered across centuries and cultures and disciplines, is yes. Not easily. Not completely. The unconscious does not yield to demand. It responds to patience, to curiosity, to the particular quality of attention that is open rather than searching. Tonight we visit those practices, gently, unhurriedly, one by one. The oldest and most systematic of the modern Western approaches to the unconscious is psychoanalysis. Developed by Freud, psychoanalysis began with a deceptively simple premise that making the unconscious conscious, bringing into awareness the hidden material that drives behavior from below, is itself healing. The psychoanalytic relationship creates a particular kind of space in which the usual social rules about what is appropriate to say or feel are temporarily suspended. In that suspended space, the unconscious begins to move. It speaks in slips of the tongue, in patterns that repeat across sessions and across relationships, in the quality of the silence between words. To make the unconscious conscious is not to destroy it. It is to enter into a different relationship with it, a relationship of awareness rather than unknowing. Let the body breathe, easy and full. The mind can rest while we travel. Only the soft movement of ideas through a quieting consciousness, like water through an open hand. One of the primary tools of psychoanalysis is free association. The instruction is almost absurdly minimal. Say whatever comes to mind. Do not edit. Do not select. Simply allow whatever is present to be spoken, following each thought to wherever it leads. It sounds easy. It is, in practice, surprisingly difficult, because the mind, when left entirely to itself, tends toward association, toward the linked chains of connection that run through the unconscious, one thought pulling the next by invisible threads of meaning and emotion. Free association is the practice of getting out of the way, of allowing the unconscious to speak in its own order, trusting that the chain of thought goes somewhere real. Related to this, developed by Jung from his early experimental work, is word association. A list of words is read, one by one, and the subject responds with the first word that comes to mind. The responses are recorded. So are the response times, and the hesitations, because where something else happens, where there is a delay, an unusual response, a visible shift in composure, that is where the unconscious has announced itself. That is what Jung called a complex. Word association is the practice of listening for the hesitations, for the places where the smooth surface of response breaks open briefly and something from below comes through. Hypnosis carries a great deal of cultural mythology around it. The reality is considerably quieter and considerably more interesting. Hypnosis is a state of focused, relaxed attention in which the ordinary critical monitoring of the conscious mind is temporarily reduced. A state not entirely unlike the one you may be in right now. In this state, certain kinds of material that are not accessible to ordinary conscious recall become reachable. Memories stored but not retrievable through deliberate effort. Emotional associations that do not surface in normal waking consciousness. It is, in a sense, a consensual and deliberate approach to the borderland state that natural sleep itself passes through each night. Your breathing is slow and regular now, the thoughts arriving less frequently, like distant music, like the very last light of a day that is almost now fully done. Active imagination is one of the most extraordinary of the practices Jung developed, and one of the most demanding. It begins in the borderland between waking and dreaming, in the aftermath of a dream that has left a vivid image, a figure, a landscape, a symbol that will not quite let go. Active imagination begins by turning toward that image, not interpreting it, not analyzing it, but meeting it directly, engaging with it as though it were real, entering into relationship with it, speaking to it, asking it what it wants, listening to what it says. Jung insisted that the figures that arise from the unconscious are not simply the creations of a passive imagination. They carry something. They have their own perspective, their own energy, their own things to say. Active imagination is the practice of making the unconscious a conversation partner. Meditation is perhaps the most widely practiced of all the approaches to the unconscious available in the modern world. The conscious mind is very noisy. The ordinary state of waking awareness is one of constant activity. Thoughts arising, proliferating, chasing one another through associative chains. Meditation quiets this stream, not by suppression, but by changing the relationship to the thoughts, by learning to observe them rather than be swept along by them. In that quieting, in the space that gradually opens as the surface chatter loses its dominance, something else becomes perceptible. The quieter material, the subtler signals, the things that were always there below the noise, waiting for the noise to become still enough to be heard. Mindfulness cultivates a particular quality of attention toward the moment-to-moment flow of experience. Not just the obvious, selected experiences, but all of it. The background emotional tone. The impulse that arises before the action. The sensation in the body that precedes the conscious recognition of a feeling. Mindfulness is the practice of catching these things as they happen, of bringing the light of observation to the automatic, the habitual, the unconscious. In that scene, something shifts. To watch the urge arise, to note it with curiosity, there it is already to introduce a gap between the impulse and the action. A space, however small, of awareness. In that space lives choice. Mindfulness is the practice of widening that space. The mind is growing very still now. The thoughts arriving softly, gently. Let them arrive. Let them pass. Like guests who come to the door, are warmly received and then move on. Journaling is a practice so simple and so accessible that its depth is easily underestimated. To write, regularly, honestly, without a predetermined agenda, is to create a record that the conscious mind cannot revise the way it revises memory. Over time, in the accumulation of honest record, patterns become visible that the day-to-day experience of living tends to obscure. The same situation that recurs. The same feeling that arrives at the same kind of moment. The unconscious speaks in patterns. Journaling is the practice of reading them. Art therapy works through a different channel, one that bypasses the verbal, analytical mind almost entirely. When a person picks up a paintbrush or a lump of clay, the thinking mind does not have the same degree of control over the image or form as it does over verbal output. Things appear in the work that the maker did not consciously intend. Shapes and colors and figures that seem to come from somewhere other than deliberate choice. Art externalizes the inner world. It gives form to what has no words. It allows the unconscious to express itself through the hands, through the body, through the ancient language of image. Art therapy is the practice of making the invisible visible, of giving the unconscious a body, a form, a face so that it can finally be seen. And finally, at the far edge of this landscape of practices, something at once ancient and modern, lucid dreaming. A lucid dream is a dream in which the dreamer becomes aware, while still dreaming, that they are dreaming. The dream continues, the vivid imagery, the felt reality of the dream world, but now infused with a degree of waking consciousness. What makes lucid dreaming extraordinary is this combination of awareness and immersion. The conscious mind, present enough to know it is dreaming, is nonetheless inside the dream, surrounded by the imagery and symbols that the unconscious has assembled, close enough to speak to them directly. Lucid dreaming is the practice of bringing consciousness to the royal road itself, of walking it awake. What a remarkable range of doorways the human mind has found into its own hidden depths. The careful unraveling of psychoanalysis, the loose, associative flow of free association, the relaxed receptivity of hypnosis, the courageous dialogue of active imagination, the quieting of meditation. the attentive observation of mindfulness, the patient accumulation of the journal, the externalizing freedom of art, the extraordinary paradox of the lucid dream, all of them different, all of them approaching the same territory, all of them guided by the same essential understanding that what lives below awareness does not have to stay there permanently. Tonight, all of these doorways are unnecessary because you are already there. In the space where you are now, half held by waking, half received by sleep, the boundary between the conscious and the unconscious is already soft, already permeable. The chatter has quieted without meditation. The associations are flowing freely without the analyst's couch. This is the gift of sleep, the most universal, most ancient, most democratic of all the doorways into the deep. You don't need a technique tonight. You only need to let what is already happening continue. The conscious mind is releasing its grip, gently, finger by finger. And in that space, as it has always been, as it always will be, the unconscious waits, not as something foreign, not as something fearful, but as the larger part of yourself that has been here all along, knows you, has always known you. Let it receive you tonight. Let yourself be known. Let the doorways dissolve because the door itself is no longer needed. You are already home, already in the deep, already gently, mercifully asleep. You are still here, still breathing, still held in this long, quiet, beautiful night that has carried us so far together. We have arrived at last at the final segment of our journey, and it feels right that we arrive here gently, not with fanfare, but with the same soft, unhurried quality that has carried us through every segment before this one. Tonight we go a little further into some of the deeper, stranger, more extraordinary methods that human beings have found for exploring the inner world, and into the widest possible frame, the evolutionary, the cultural, the mythological, within which the individual unconscious finds its place. We begin with the body. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a therapy that has become one of the most well-evidenced treatments for trauma available. The basic process involves recalling a traumatic memory while simultaneously engaging in bilateral stimulation, typically the tracking of a moving finger with the eyes. Something in this combination seems to change the way the memory is stored and experienced. Memories that were frozen, fixed in a state of raw, unprocessed intensity, begin to move, to be metabolized, to lose the quality of overwhelming immediacy and acquire instead the quality of something that happened, that is over. The unconscious holds trauma in the body as much as in the mind. EMDR seems to speak to both at once. Your body is perfectly still now, perfectly at rest. Whatever it has carried today, let it release now completely into the surface beneath you. You are held. The body can rest entirely. Breathwork is among the oldest of the somatic practices, the use of the body through deliberate alteration of the breath to access psychological and emotional material that ordinary verbal approaches cannot easily reach. Certain breathwork practices can produce states of consciousness significantly different from ordinary waking awareness. States in which emotional material held somatically, stored in the tissues and the nervous system rather than in accessible memory, can begin to surface. These are somatic memories, the body's record of experiences that the verbal mind never fully processed, held in the musculature, in the patterns of breath. Breath work creates the conditions in which the body can begin to tell its own story, in its own language, at its own pace. Bodywork extends this understanding further into the direct, physical engagement with the body's own stored material. Various traditions share a common recognition that the nervous system stores the residue of overwhelming experience not as narrative, but as pattern, as the body's habitual way of holding itself, as the chronic tension in the shoulders, the constriction in the chest. These patterns are physical. They are in the tissue, and they can be worked with physically by bringing gentle, respectful awareness to the patterns themselves. The body is not separate from the unconscious. In many ways, it is the unconscious made flesh. Biofeedback approaches the hidden processes of the body from a different angle entirely, from the angle of measurement, of making the invisible visible through technology. The body runs an enormous number of processes below conscious awareness: heart rate variability, skin conductance, muscle tension, brain wave patterns. Biofeedback attaches sensors that measure these processes and presents the information back to the person in real time. Suddenly, the invisible becomes visible. What research has consistently found is that people, given this feedback, can learn to influence processes they would otherwise have no conscious access to at all, can learn to slow the heart rate deliberately, to regulate the autonomic nervous system. Biofeedback is the practice of making the unconscious body legible. Drift a little deeper now, the thoughts becoming less frequent, the spaces between them growing wider and more welcoming. There is nothing to hold on to, just the breath and the dark. Among the most complex and contested of the approaches to the unconscious are psychedelic substances. Certain compounds have been used in ceremonial and healing contexts by human cultures for thousands of years, and in recent decades, they have become the subject of a remarkable revival of serious clinical research. What these compounds share is the ability to produce profound and temporary alterations in consciousness, frequently involving a loosening or dissolution of the ordinary boundaries of the self.